becomes
Sorry about that. Continue.
Yeah, so how did areas become sacrifice zones? And redlining and red flight in the 1960s produced a pattern of intensive industry operations concentrated in urban areas of predominant low income and or communities of colors. Low property values in these areas allowed the pattern of Please mute yourself, ma'am.
You have to take down that paint in the kitchen.
Barbara, please, thank you. Low property values in these areas have allowed the pattern of siting industry operations in these communities to continue. And this resulted in the creation of a sacrifice zone communities that are disproportionately exposed to dangerous levels of pollutants. Next slide. As most leaders know, air emissions and water discharge are regulated one pipe at a time. Regulated as though those are the only pipe or the only discharge in an area. Obviously, though, in most of these industrial complexes, there are many pipes and often hundreds of pipes, and not just one. So you don't have to be Albert Einstein to understand that hundreds of pipes, each releasing a number of health-damaging chemicals into the air, is a problem for pregnant women, small children, families, and others living downwind. So several summers ago, we challenged our group of interns that year to come up with a new way to look at how we would define what a sacrifice zone looks like. I mean, at the time, there were word definitions, but there was no process that you could actually go through that would identify that this area is a sacrifice zone. So that was the challenge we put to our interns. As we first began to think about this, next slide, the first thing that came up is what do we look at? Do we look at the air emissions, the wastewater discharges? Do we look at contaminated sites? There are so many different types of communities that could be defined as sacrifice zones. And we struggled with this and recognized how hard it would be because we were looking to create some kind of policy option and recognized that with so many different regulating agencies, this would be really hard. So we settled on looking at air emissions, not because the others aren't important, because they certainly are, but because we had to start someplace. And so we decided to look at air. And but we also recognize that's a limitation of this approach. But like I say, it's just meant to be a start and a way to start to move this issue forward. So what did the interns come up with? They did a great job, I think, of taking an existing tool, the EPA EJScreen, environmental justice screen, and use that as a starting point. And this is what they came up with. The definition is a 4-mile radius where the National Air Toxic Assessment, Air Toxics Cancer Risk, and or Respiratory Hazard Index is at or above the 70th percentile for the state. That's a lot of words, and it says a lot. We're going to go into this, so you'll get a better feel for this after a little more conversation. And of course, Hunter, who I mentioned earlier, is going to go through this and exactly tell you how we got this. So this image on the screen to the right, the yellow circle with the radius, is a 4-mile radius around a site in Detroit, Michigan. I think it's the Marathon Oil site. And we chose this 4-mile radius because 4-mile is the radius that EPA uses around Superfund sites to determine and establish risks. And so these other two indexes, the air toxic cancer risk and the respiratory hazard index, are developed by the our databases developed by the National Air Toxic Assessment Program, which is a part of EPA also. And they collect this information on percentiles, rates of different types of hazard indexes. They have 11 of them in this database. We just chose these two because it seemed to work. And we picked 70 percentile because it seemed to work. There's no science behind how we got there other than it just seemed to work as a starting point. Again, that's a number we can discuss and debate, but it's, again, a starting point. And we felt like the hardest part of something like this is to create a process and see if it works. You know, does it pass the smell test, so to speak? No pun intended. So conceptually, you can think of this 4-mile radius around a chemical plant as a discrete area or a bubble that defines a sacrifice zone. So once you plug in a facility address in the radius and then put that into the EJScreen, it automatically gives you the percentile for, as I mentioned, these 11 different hazard indexes and environmental indicators. And so, and then with your 4-mile radius also plugged in, then you've got a area with these statistics that you can evaluate. And so when we looked at the 70 percentile, we said, wow, this seems to work. This seems to give us an area where we have quite a high radius of cancer risk or respiratory hazard indexes. And so who gets to decide whether, how this thing works? And the answer is that you do. You as community residents get to decide. You can use the EPAScreen anytime. It's available off the EPA's website, and there's lots of different places you can go. And again, we'll go through this in some detail for you, but you get to decide. And so, and we chose the 70th percentile because it tells you that you're at the 70% of the air emissions for this particular chemical in this particular site are below the rest of the state. So this is in the top 30%, in other words, of the state. So and we chose these particular indexes because they give you a good sense of the human health impact that these emissions are having in this bubble, if you will, or in this 4-mile radius. So in this approach, we're not regulating individual industries or proposing to address individual injury. You can go back, Hunter, go back to that previous slide. Yeah, leave this one for a minute. So we're actually looking at the human health effects, the public health risk that these emissions pose to the people who live in this community. So now I want to talk a little bit, I mentioned a little bit about the EJScreen, which is EPA's environmental justice screening and mapping tool. It's available online. It's not an easy tool to use, and it only has air emissions data in it, but it's, again, a tool you can use. And we'll talk about how in a little bit with Teresa. But let's talk a little bit about the National Air Toxic Assessment indicators themselves. So all of these indicators are derived from this database maintained by the National Air Toxic Assessment, or EPA, and they're all toxic air indicators. Next slide, Hunter. By looking at air toxic cancer risks and respiratory hazard risks, we're covering cancer and non-cancer effects of air emissions. These measurements ensure we are focusing on the human health effects of air pollution, and by looking at communities with assessment values in the top 70 percentile, we're looking at the communities with the worst 30% public health risks by air contaminants. And when you do this and you put all this together, you get a reasonably good way to define an area as with high air emissions that can be defined as a sacrifice zone. So with that said, Hunter's going to now take a few minutes to give you a specific example of how this works. So Hunter, are you ready to take that one on?
Yes, let me just switch screens for everybody. Hello, my name is Hunter, and I'm going to be presenting a little short tutorial on the EJScreen. So if any of y'all are wondering how to access this, we are recording. And if it goes a bit too fast for you, or if you want to know a little bit more, we also have a secondary training call video. It goes over EPA tools, such as the EJScreen, the ECO database, and the TRI Toxics Tracker. So for this example today, I live in Texas. I'm from Houston, and Houston is one of the oil capitals of the nation. So there's a town near Houston named Beaumont. If people are familiar with it, Beaumont has a lot of oil refineries. I found just one random one. It could be anything, an oil refinery, as Stephen was saying, any source of air pollution. You will then, to use the EJScreen, take this address. So I'm going to simply copy this address. We're going to go over to the EJScreen. So you can just type in EJScreen in Google, and it'll give you the environmental justice screening mapping tool. It'll pop up onto the site, and you can just click this link for launch the EJScreen tool, and then you will get this interface. So I don't want to be there. I want to be here. It really doesn't matter where you are, where it pops you out in the map, as long as you have an address. So I'm going to copy and paste that address in there for the refinery. And what's going to do is it's going to give me a nice little purple plus sign. I don't know if many can see it, but it's right here. So what this purple plus sign is, it indicates your site that you're interested in. So I'm just going to do Exxon refinery, give it a name. And like what Stephen was saying, we're going to give it a 4-mile buffer, and then we're going to add it to the map. So now we have a nice big buffer of 4 miles for within this specific site. And so this is the key detail right here. If you want to get the information, you're going to go to this link right here where it says explore reports, click it, and it's going to give you all this information on ozone, air toxics, diesel, everything that is registered within the EJScreen. But a key thing you should note is this is, if it's in blue, it's for the USA percentile. So this site, the USA percentile checked, is comparing data throughout the entire country. So the ozone of the entire country is about the 34th percentile, for particulate matter and diesel about 91st percentile. And that could be helpful if you're looking for a comparison between the rest of the US. But if you want to know the comparison for other sites in Texas, according to EPA data, you would click this box and get the orange data. So I'm going to get rid of the US data right here. Now, we could go over to air toxics respiratory. For this particular site, you now have a 90th percentile throughout the rest of Texas only. And as Stephen was saying, that's well above our definition of 70th percentile. So very, very high air toxic respiratory exposure. And then you have other sources. So this is just the EJ indexes. You can also have pollution and sources. Again, you can toggle between state and nation. Socioeconomic indicators, so low income, people of color, people age over 65, gives you a nice rough percentile, and then supplemental indexes. So that's if you want to get a nice snapshot. And if you want to get a visual of this, you can go over to this nice little bar right here. So we have maps, places, reports, and tools. Tools is if you are very comfortable using GIS data, like GPS, geo informational sciences data. If you want to like play with it and you're more familiar with that, you can use this. If you're kind of more of the lay person, you could stick to places and maps. So like Stephen was saying, we're going to look for air toxics. So here's a nice little listing right here. We're going to look for air toxics cancer risk. And what that does is, I'm just going to close this little tab out. It's still there whenever you click the plus sign and zoom out for a bit. So here's our buffer. That little plus, if you can still see it, is our refinery. And if you look at this little index right here, we can see the 95th to 100th percentile. And basically this place lights up like a Christmas tree. This entire area within 4 miles is very, very susceptible to cancer risk according to EPA data. Now I keep saying EPA data because we should really point out that the EJScreen is a tool, but is not a solution. So lots of people have pointed out that when they bring up this data, the EPA will be like, oh, our data says otherwise, but then groups will argue, but it's in your actual EJScreen, where did you get the data? Again, we have to reiterate, this is a tool as a starting point. And when we get to Teresa can go ahead and tell you how she recommends using this data as a start. And then there's a lot of other things you could do and toggle between. You can get rid of this, and we could look at air toxics respiratory. Again, a nice little chart of how to map onto which of these areas. You can even look for specific places. So EPA regulated facilities, if you want to see a Superfund site, let's get rid of these. And so you want to see a Superfund site, there's a Superfund site right over here. If you want to see air pollution sites, bang, there's a bunch of air pollution sites already within our buffer. And it goes on and on and on. It's a very exhaustive list. And you have places of worship, hospitals, parks. Parks are important if you want to see maybe how children could be affected by the air pollution, prisons, public housing. And you can even go over here to like health disparities. So low life expectancy, we can see, again, a very high expectation of low life expectancy. And I don't want to exhaust you with all of these overwhelming details, but First Start is a very good, very exhaustive tool to begin looking for your sacrifice zone. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this now to Teresa, who can recommend how to use it.
Sorry about that. I couldn't find my mute button. I am Teresa Mills. I'm the grants manager plus an organizer for the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. I've been doing environmental work for going on 35 years. I've been with CHEJ for longer than they probably care to admit, but it's been a long time. The EJScreen is, as Hunter said, a tool. It's a very useful tool as long as you know its limitations. As Stephen said, it only looks at certain things. There are other tools. So if you bring together all of these other tools, such as the ECHO database, the TRI tracker, it will give you a better picture of what's going on in your community. There is also ways that you can look at water, you can look at Superfund. So all of those links are available. So if you want a more detailed report or more detailed information about what's going on in your community, get the other data, get the rest of the data. But the EJScreen is good as an organizing tool for your local community. Picture yourself going into a meeting where you see the EJScreen map blown up to a much larger size, and you see all of those areas that Hunter showed you that was in red, that were very high cancer risk. Imagine what that says to people. The information is like in your face. So you organize your local community with that. You show them that this is what is going on in your community. And then you organize the community group to go to your local elected officials to show to them what the EJScreen shows that's going on in your community. And then there's a lot of things you can do. You could actually, every state has a cancer registry. Look at your state cancer registry. See what it says about your local community. Use that. You know, there's so much that can be used. And especially if you're fighting a potential new facility, get all this information gathered. Use that to help fight to keep a facility out of your community. Your local elected officials are not going to want to really hear what you have to say. But again, be in their face. I know we have at least one council person on this call, and that council person, we worked with him very early on, and he took everything that we mentioned and took it a step further and ran for office and became a council person. So it can be done, and he is still an in-your-face type of person, even with his own board, even with his own elected officials. Oh, I can't think of the word I was using, but anyway, so it's very good. And what I have seen is the EJScreen can be as limiting as you make it, or it can be as helpful as you make it. That's the important part. Think of how you can use it. Can you go to your city council or your city, where I am, we call them city council. Could you go to your state legislators? Think of a bill that you may be fighting or a company. Go to your state legislators. Hold a lobby day that you can show these pictures. You can show how your community is already overburdened and you don't need more. I remember when we were CHEJ, we were working on dioxin coming from incinerators. And one of the things we did was we drew outlines of a human being on cardboard. And dioxin was, we're already full of dioxin. We can't use anymore. Okay, dioxin is an air pollutant. Dioxin would not show up on the EJScreen, but you can still use this tactic. So we did the cutouts of humans. We had little children. I mean, we laid my daughter down on the garage floor and cut out a silhouette of her. And we spray painted them red to show that we were full of dioxin. And just to be ornery and to be a in your face eye grabber, we put those silhouettes in body bags and laid them on the State House lawn. So it's the shock factor. Some people will say, oh, you shouldn't do stuff like that, but you're talking about fighting for your life. So what are you willing to do to fight for your life? We were willing to make, not only did we have body bags, another time when Lois came to town, we built a mock cemetery on the State House. So those are the types of things that you can do. Get the information, use all the information that's out there, and then come up with a plan, of how to use it yourself. What I would do and what you would do, of course, may be different. And then you can always contact us at CHEJ and have more of a one-on-one discussion on what we can do, what you can do. We're always, willing to help with that. We're always willing to help with organizing. So, always feel free to reach out to us. And so going to kind of quit right there, but if you have questions, then we're going to go into the question part. So Hunter, do you want to go through a couple of questions in the chat?
Yes, ma'am. Okie doke.
Some of these questions will probably be something that I can cover. Some of them may be more directed toward Hunter or Stephen. So we'll make sure that we get you the right person.
Claire Leahy is wondering, where can she find the state cancer registry?
It's probably in your state health department. So you would contact them. Every state, I think every state, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but I think every state was required to set up a cancer registry.
Yeah, I don't think actually every state has done that yet.
Okay.
Well, there may be a handful that have not, but Teresa's right. I mean, you should be able to find that pretty easily.
Right. And if their state hasn't set up one, well, there you go. That's
another point.
Plan. They need one. Yeah.
That's it for the chat questions. That was pretty straightforward.
Okay. All right. Well, I think
Okay.
I saw one about recording and the slides, and yes, all of that stuff will be available. Hunter will be sending it to you.
I got another one for y'all. It's are there any resources for water by Lisa Wynn? Lisa, could you be able to explain a bit more about what you mean by resources for water, like water testing?
She probably, well, I won't put words in her mouth. But
If
until
not,
she comes on,
Yeah.
then yes, there is. If you go to EnviroFacts, there is information on water there. So, and I think on the EJScreen, there may be water issues too. It's just that we don't cover it in the sacrifice zones. But there's lots of information out there if you.
Hunter alluded to, Lisa, were you going to weigh in? Sorry.
Yes. the site that we are looking into was briefly listed as a Superfund site. Would there be more information regarding that if it was not continued? I guess my information is they ran out of money, so they delisted it. So would that information be on there as well?
I'm not sure what you mean by temporary. I've never heard of that happening. Have you, Stephen?
No,
No.
usually it is or it isn't.
Yeah.
Or it's in some process of evaluation to eventually become a Superfund site. It may take years, and it often does.
Right.
Unless there's political interest in it. But a lot of the, in the EJ tool with the indicators they have, these 11 indicators, they're all data that's collected through this National Air Toxic Assessments program. And so that's where it's limited. So it doesn't work for every type of contaminated site, whether, so that's a limitation. But if you're dealing with air emissions, here's a good tool. And one of the things I thought it was pretty unique about what the interns came up with is that that there's nobody else who's come up with a tool for actually defining that this is a sacrifice zone. I mean, people know it because they're living in one and they're breathing the contaminants and they're getting sick. And so people intuitively know, but this is a more subjective way, at least for air emissions, for saying, okay, yes, you are. You're in the 90 percentile in the case of the Exxon refinery in terms of these two indicators. And that means that you are a sacrifice zone, at least as we see it. And of course, you can see it that way too if you choose and want to use this tool. And so that's what it is. It's a tool. It's something you can take to gather information and organize it in a way that you can use it to not only educate your people, because for example, you could share the information with the people in your community, people who are interested and those who aren't, and say, this is what we're living with. We're living with percentile, and you can get a list of all the chemicals that are being monitored by this National Air Toxic Assessment. So it gives you lots of information to use to then come up with a plan for how to use that information to generate pressure to get the kinds of things that you're on your list of goals and objectives. And so we see it as a really positive thing to use. It has its limitations and its applications, but for those things that it can work for, it can be very helpful. Other questions or comments?
Yes, Renee asked a question that I could answer. So Renee wants to know how we can track diesel emissions with this tool. Actually, when I was doing the presentation earlier, there's a little toggle in the Explore data. Again, you can refer to this video after we send it out, but there is a diesel particulate matter. There's two actually. There's diesel particulate matter, and then there's the other particulate matter, which can be related to diesel. And it has a chart, and it also has a nice map, which you can see highlighted from anywhere from white to red. So that's a really good start. Do you have anything else to add for that one, Stephen? For diesel particulate matter?
Yeah, just that with that kind of information, you can find out, the amount, the percentile of emissions, of particulate emissions from diesel that are in the area that you've targeted. And so that again is a good piece of information to use to educate people in your neighborhood, go after your congressman or your elected officials and say, wait, this is too much. This is not what we ever thought we would be living with, but yet here it is. And you can look at some of the health indicators in there in those areas as well. And so you can match some of that and say, these are the kinds of health problems that are showing up. And this is just one of the pollution sources we're dealing with.
I think
you might want to add something to that too. Teresa, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is, and I think this is something that maybe CHEJ may want to do in the near future is try to pull together, and I know Hunter has done some of this, but pull together a link to all of these different sites that could be used, like the EnviroFacts, all of these different things that
The echo
are
data.
available.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, Hunter, how many links that you had. I think in the last time you presented this, you had more links, you provided links. So
Yes,
I
a
think
lot.
that, yeah. So just use all of the information that is available to you. Contact your regional EPAs, your just everyone, be in everyone's face. I'm a grassroots activist from way back, and I just believe that I was trying to protect my daughter who had a bone tumor, and I lived like just a little over a mile from the largest dioxin producing incinerator in the country. So I was willing to do just about anything to protect my daughter, and I'm sure all of you feel the same way. So it's just use all of the information that you can gather and make nuisance of yourself. Senator John Glenn said to me, Teresa, you are the most tenacious person I have ever met in my life. And being just a high school graduate, I had no idea what the word tenacious meant. So I had to go home and look it up, and because I didn't know if he complimented me or insulted me. So my response to him was, you think so? So he didn't know that I didn't understand what it was. But anyway, so just be in everyone's face. It's your right. That's all. Any more questions? Raise your hands. Little reaction thing down there.
So I just want to clarify one thing. I mean, last year, I think it was in the summer, Hunter did a presentation using 5 or 6 different databases to show people what kinds of tools are out there. That the recording from that is available, through CHEJ if you're interested. He explained the EJScreen as he did here, but he also addressed the EPA ECHO database, the EnviroScreen. Or Hunter, why don't you actually mention which ones you covered? I don't remember all of them, but I remember there were 2 or 3, and again, they're all tools to use in organizing.
Yes, we went over the EJScreen, the Eco database, and the TRI toxics tracker. We did not mention EnviroFacts, but at the very last of the recording, we did go over a nice big list of the EPA tools that are also available that if you want to reference. I will include the link to that video in the follow-up email as well, so you can have all of this information.
Okay. And Hunter, could you also include a link to the list that you just talked about?
Yes.
Can you send that out again?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be great. And again, if anybody needs help, once you get all of this and you get the information, if you don't have a good idea of what to do with it, contact us. And we will certainly be willing to help you.
I have one more from the chat, which I think is really important question. And so Alan is asking, what is the source of the data that the EJScreen uses to create its analysis? What if there aren't any nearby monitors to the pollution sites? I think that'll finish up the chat questions, but that's a really interesting one, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the source of the data is this National Air Toxics Assessment database. And they gather it from a system of monitors that exist around the country. And so it's limited in some ways, but in a lot of ways it's limited, but it's something that exists. It's no doubt an underestimate of what's really going on out there, but it's again a starting point, and it's a picture of what it as a minimum, it's a picture of what's going on in a neighborhood, in an area. So And I can't emphasize enough. It means a lot to me, I guess. I don't know, maybe because I was impressed by the interns, but here's a way you can actually self-define your community as a sacrifice zone and use that as an organizing tool to create pressure on the companies that are contributing to that. I mean, at the time, we came up with a number of policy options. We had a meeting in Houston, in Baytown, before the pandemic hit, and just right in December, right before it all came down, and people brainstormed. Where we were going with this was to come up with a policy and a new approach to regulating emissions in these sacrifice zones. And in order to do that, you first had to define it as a sacrifice zone. And then in that bubble, in that 3-mile radius, there would be limits, not just on one pollutant or one pipe at a time, the way EPA does it now, but you would limit all the combined total emissions in this bubble. This is what we were thinking at that time. And we capped it at, I think, 25. What was it? I don't remember. I think it was 25 into tons. That's what it was, a maximum of no more than 25 tons of everything combined. And again, you can get this data and information out of the TRI database. And so, and there are 187 different chemicals. They're called hazardous air pollutants that are monitored by EPA. And so those would be and those are the ones that are in this database, this National Air Toxic Assessment database. And so you would use all of those emissions to create a limit. And then you would have all of these steps that would happen and go forward within this bubble. Things like notification of every person who lives in this community that this was a high air emissions area. And you'd create an educating tool using information that would target people, that would target medical people in the community in this bubble, that would target doctors, not just the hospitals. We also were suggesting a wellness van be dispatched to this area that would provide a way for people to go and have the different health problems evaluated. And so we didn't develop this completely, but we started with this meeting in Houston, and we have a kind of some sort of starting point of some of the ideas that came out of that. But I think it was really just a way to, that whole policy approach is a different approach than just using this as a tool for basic organizing. It obviously overlaps and there's a lot of similarities, but one is developing a plan that you would take to Washington to create a new set of regulations to try to restrict emissions in an area like this. And the other is something you can use locally to, plug in any address and see what you get, and use that information to then go target the people who can, affect those emissions, whether it's the company, whether it's the regulators, whether it's your politicians.
We have a hand of Renee, if you want to go ahead and talk.
Renee, you're free to talk. Just unmute yourself. There you go.
We have a city council that approved a 2 million square foot warehouse. Actually, it's 3 warehouses, and it's about a mile from many residents. So we were trying to figure out how we can stop it. The pollution levels are high already. It's going to add 2,000 diesel trucks to the traffic and also 1,200 vehicles. So I guess I'm looking at all these tools. I don't even know which one to start with, but I just wanted to know if I can email you guys or something, because we're really concerned.
Yeah, you should definitely do that. Teresa, do you want to respond a little bit to that?
Absolutely. Renee, you're more than welcome to contact me. And then we can have a longer conversation. And my email address is tmills. So it's TMILLS at CHEJ.org. And I would be more than happy to have a conversation. I already thinking about some tactics that we could use. So
Wonderful, thank you. And it has blue line streams on that land. And the feasibility study was a farce, but I will definitely get in touch. Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome. And maybe we'll have Hunter join us
That
for a
sounds
call
good.
where he can do an independent or an individualized EJScreen with us.
Okay,
So
wonderful.
we'll be able to do it.
Thank you,
Renee,
thank you.
Renee, where are you?
I'm in Georgia,
Okay, what's the name of the town?
Stonecrest,
Okay,
Georgia.
thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you guys.
Lisa, I think you have your hand up.
So it seems like the EPA would also be using this tool because in our meetings with the EPA, they have stated there's a number of factors they can't consider. Everything from noise and popularity of the site, out-of-state waste, increase in road usage, but all those are factors in the impact on these things in that community. And the whole environmental justice website would seem to be a tool that they should be using as well. Am I misunderstanding it?
Well, no, in some ways you are, but you're more misunderstanding EPA. I think that the agency is really not in the business of finding ways to reduce emissions.
Mhm.
They're in the business of regulating agencies or pollutant the way the laws stipulate or the regulations stipulate. So even though they've developed this tool, and if they were to start using the tool for the purpose of limiting emissions, I think they could be more effective at what they do, what they're in charge of doing. But unfortunately, as a practical matter, while there are some great people in state agencies and in the that are involved in this work, most of them are just following the letter of the law and what they're allowed to do and within the context and the framework of what the rules say. And so, and that's one of the beauties of this tool, we think, is that you can take their own tool and kind of use it to create more pressure on them to do what you want them to do. And
Right.
so I think you kind of flip it on them because they can't challenge the data you're using because it's their data, you know, it's their tool. And so it's a way to then say, okay, now you need to do some things here that can reduce these emissions. And what are the options?
Well, and there's also truck traffic. I mean, it's true. EPA does not regulate truck traffic, but if you have this EJ report and you take it to your zoning people and you show them, you know, do not allow this to be brought into the neighborhood. We are already overburdened. And you need to use that term. We are already overburdened. We don't need more. So, and take it to, you know, your state health department or your local health department, you know, here, take it to everybody, you know, go to everyone, be a nuisance. If it's something to do with health, take it to the Board of Health. Do not ever, I've always taken this stance, do not be afraid to set across the table from the enemy. And the enemy is considered anyone that is trying to harm your community. So do not be afraid to set across the table from them. Make them talk to you.
Yes, I would like to make an appointment to speak with you because this is a very in-depth conversation, I believe. So I'd appreciate your time if you could.
Yeah. just send me an email and, you know, remind me to set up something with you, okay? Be more than happy to.
I mean, what Teresa is really good at, and I'll brag on her a little bit because I've known her so many years, is nobody helps people in community groups come up with a plan better than Teresa. I mean, in order to accomplish anything in your community, of course, you need a group and you need a set of goals, but then you need a plan. You need to figure out how you're going to get there. Whatever your goals are, whatever you're trying to accomplish in your community, is you need a plan to get there. And nobody does that better than Teresa. And she doesn't like pull magic plans out of the air. I mean, she will sit with you and listen to what you're trying to accomplish and what is the information you have available to you to understand this. And she'll ask you 100 questions. You'll get tired of her asking you 100 questions. That's the process that we use in communicating with people to try to understand and help you understand what we know and what we don't know. And, you know, if it's information, sometimes she'll call me, or sometimes she'll, you know, call others and reach out to folks. I mean, one of the strengths of what we CHEJ have is a long history of knowing different people in different parts of the country, both community folks who have already been experienced maybe some of the same things you folks are experiencing, as well as technical people, and so, you know, we call on those folks and we'll connect you with those folks, you know, where it makes sense. So it's real important to come up with a plan, and I can't encourage you all as needed to reach out to Teresa. I mean, she's overwhelmed as it is, but you know, it's something that it's the best. That's how you address these things. I mean, this is, you know, EJScreen is just a tool. It doesn't mean nothing by itself. If you don't have a plan for what to do with it, you know, you're not going to move anything. More
Thank
questions?
you.
Yes, we have Cosetta, and I think that'll be it.
Okay.
Let me unmute. Oh, hi. Yeah, I had gotten an email this morning because we're still trying to figure out the systems and ways to go. And we've been in communication with you all off and on. But that EPA was in a recent lawsuit, I guess it's a current one. I'm not sure with who, but where I think it sounded like, and I need to read it again, they were trying to defend that they had the right to regulate water, the stream, the pollution in streams and certain other waterways. And apparently somebody, big industry or somebody, is challenging that. So, I mean, if that's the case, well, yay, maybe we need to step up and say, yeah, they need that right. And if they don't have that right, it kind of literally gives the polluters the control or the right to regulate themselves, which, as we know, doesn't work. Whole communities can die, and they say it's okay. So I'm just wondering, in a situation like that, what do you think? Kind of a national push to change the law, or how is it that these polluters got the upper hand, that they can dictate that nobody needs to tell them how much pollution should be in a stream? I don't know. Any thoughts?
Teresa, Hunter, you want to respond? I mean, I have some thoughts too, but I'll give somebody else a chance.
Well, the one thing that I have noticed on water, and it's the same with air also, is the agency permits these things with blinders on. They actually do not have the ability to consider cumulative effects or cumulative pollution. So you may have one facility releasing, let's say, I don't know, lead into the creek or to the stream. And then you have another one right next door that's also releasing, and then another one that's also releasing. So they do not take the cumulative effect. And that's one thing that needs to change, is being able to take the cumulative effect on air, water, soil, everything. So, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to really say something very similar. That's part of the problems with these regulations, in EPA in particular, but state agencies as well, is they're all regulating one pipe, one chemical at a time, because that's the way the rules are written. And that's what needs to change, is nobody's exposed to one chemical at a time in the world that we live in. It's very rare, at least. And so as scientists, the EPA has struggled with how to combine exposures and to come up with a risk analysis that allows that can judge what the risks are that people are facing when they're exposed to 10, 20, 50 or more chemicals at a time. And so those tools don't exist. I mean, the closest EPA has been able to come with is to take the individual cancer risk values and just add them together. And so that's one limited approach to sort of looking at that, but it doesn't go nearly far enough because not many chemicals, not all these chemicals are carcinogens. There's only a limited number. And so that just isn't sufficient. So that's part of the challenge. And I think it's up to we need a national approach that really looks at the cumulative risk question. And there's been more conversation about that at the national level, but it hasn't gone very far. I mean, just like there's been a lot of conversation about sacrifice zones. I mean, this tool that we've presented today is the only tool I'm aware of that actually attempts to define it in some kind of way, other than just declaring it. And so, I mean, we need more of this, I think. I mean, yes, this one's limited, but, we need more ways, and government needs more ways to really address these cumulative exposures and find ways to address these emissions in a holistic way, not one pipe at a time, not one emissions at a time.
I think that's time, Stephen.
We do have a couple of more minutes if anybody has one last question or so. This is your time, folks. We're here for you till 1 o'clock. And
let's do Kelsey.
Hi. One of the questions that I have is a lot of the issues that have come up are it seems like we have in common, even if we're across state lines. So is there a way that we could, or maybe there already is, like a listserv or a private Reddit group where as these issues come up, we can post and help each other in that way? Because again, I know you guys are so busy, but maybe if this is something that's interesting to you guys or anyone who's participating, if that's something you guys would want to do, can we talk about that maybe in the future or figure out how to organize it together?
yeah. Teresa, yeah, go ahead, Hunter.
Actually, since it's like a Reddit thing, I kind of thought I could take that. So we recently came out with this newsletter. It's a monthly newsletter. It's called the Backyard Monthly. And in the upcoming one, we're planning on asking a bunch of our email subscribers what they would like. If y'all want to do a Reddit or something, we could very well do that. And we could actually link it in that monthly newsletter. We could talk about it in our meeting later today, Stephen. That's totally possible.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to do something like that, I mean, we can facilitate it. I mean, we can create the structure. You guys would kind of be, self-managing, and we can contribute, of course. Teresa, any thoughts?
No, I think it's a great idea, though. I'm not sure about Reddit. I don't know what that is. So I don't know if that would be limiting it or what.
It's just a message board site. It's kind of like a very watered down Facebook, a lot different though. But
So that in place of a listserv, is that what you're saying? Hunter, are you saying that in place of a listserv?
I think that's what Kelsey was saying, or if I'm wrong, you can say so, Kelsey.
Oh, no, you're correct. I think Reddit is just user-friendly, is pretty user-friendly. People can remain anonymous. So sometimes, in some capacity, to a certain degree, people can remain anonymous. And that's kind of good because if there's whistleblowers or anything like that, that would be a good way to, that's always good. But it doesn't have the sort of like background static that Facebook or other social media has, I think.
And what state are you in, Kelsey?
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma? Oh,
All right, we are now over 1 o'clock. I know there's still one hand up. But I think, Alan, if you have a quick question, we could do it. Otherwise, I think we're going to have to move on.
Thank you. I just wanted to re-ask if we could have the contact information mail out to the participants in this meeting.
yes.
Yes, yes. Just
Quick answers, yes.
to reiterate and wrap up, after this meeting, everyone will receive a link to this recording, a link to another recording we did back in June of last year covering all of the EPA tools that we presented. Everyone will get a copy of the slides. The slides will also have instructions on how to use the EJScreen. And we will also provide Teresa's contact information. Is that fine, Teresa?
Yes.
Should be covering all the bases there.
All right, that's the sound of our session ending. I want to thank everybody for participating. Hunter just mentioned what we're sending out as follow-up. So thank you very much. Hope this has been helpful to you all, and we look forward to working with some of you in the future. Thank you.